Okay, guys, I got a serious update for you. You heard me talk about SEMA and the product roadmap radar. I just caught up with Matt, who's the founder there, and he gave me the latest on what they are building. And my mind is blown. The team at SEMA are taking things to the next level. Built around the core of the product roadmap radar, i.e. code and Jira analysis, they are building agent orchestration across the product lifecycle. Picture this. You hook up this system same as before, i.e. integrate your repository and your backlog, Jira today. From that point, SEMA's agent analyzes the codebase and makes suggestions as to what needs to be done next and what could improve, optimize the product. Then, if those tasks are routine, the agent assigns the task to a coding agent, think something like Devin, to complete the minutia, while assigning the human-in-the-loop task to engineers themselves. What you end up with is engineers focusing on building core competency features while AI handles all the rest. If you're not salivating right now, I don't think you fully understand what this means. But here's what I would suggest. Right now, their product is in a closed beta, and SEMA is looking for folks to sign up for their Product Intelligence Advisory Board. This gives you the opportunity to use the product, give feedback, help shape the future of what's built. Oh, and not to mention additional free usage of the product potentially through the end of 2026. So, if that fits your workflow and toolset, you need to reach out today. Go to codestory.co/nextlevel, NEXTLEVEL, and reach out to Matt at SEMA to learn more and join the Product Intelligence Advisory Board. Again, that's codestory.co/nextlevel. This episode is sponsored by Postman. Postman is the world's leading API platform, trusted by 98% of the Fortune 500 and over 40 million developers. Tap into APIs from 18,000 plus companies to power agents that make smarter decisions. Learn more at postman.com/podcast/codestory. This message is sponsored by Melee Search. Today, search isn't just a feature, it's a cornerstone. And Melee Search gives your users the experience they need with lightning-fast performance, full-text search, AI usage, and multimodal capabilities. Melee Search delivers relevant results in less than the blink of an eye. Use the promo code CODESTORY at checkout to get 2 months free at meleesearch.com. That's MEILI search.com. This episode is brought to you by Paddle. Don't settle for less when you can have more, MOR, with Paddle, your merchant of record. Eliminate the headaches of payments, grow your revenue everywhere, and focus on what you do best, building your product. Get more revenue with less hassle at paddle.com. This episode is brought to you by PropelOff. People take authentication for granted, but it's more than how customers log into your product. It's how you manage your relationship with your users. The easiest way to make authentication your advantage is to use PropelOff. PropelOff is more than just functional. It's powerful. With tools like Managed UIs, Enterprise SSO, robust user management features, and actionable insights, PropelOff adapts as your product grows. And the best part? When auth is effortless, your team can focus on scaling, not troubleshooting. That means more releases, happier customers, and more growth for your business. Save dev time, win over your customers, and propel your business forward with PropelOff. Check them out at propeloff.com. That's PROPELAUTH.com. Hello, listeners. We are bringing you a special episode as our friends at Strata return to the podcast. You might remember our interview from Season 8 with Eric Olden, co-founder and CEO of the company. Eric took us through the creation story, but today we'll be talking with Granville Schmidt, Chief Architect at Strata, who has been instrumental in architecting and building identity orchestration for AI agents from the ground up. In our chat, we're going to be discussing how the enterprises need to take advantage of identity for agents and can do so seamlessly no matter their level of tech debt, disconnection, or complex migration path. Granville, thank you for being on the show today. Thanks for being on Code Story.
Thank you so much. Super excited to be here.
Before we jump into all the things with identity orchestration and all the things you've been architecting and working on, tell me and my audience a little bit about you. Tell me about who you are.
So I am the chief architect at Strata Identity, where I focus on building the future of identity and access management for humans and AI agents. Prior to Strata, I served in the office of the CTO at F5, and I was also the chair of JavaScript Security Task Group. Before that, I also served as like a founding CTO at Seamless AI and also was an early engineer at many other startups in the healthcare space and the telephony space. I also like to build robots, do extreme sports, and have a lot of fun. I love skydiving. I love snowboarding, and I enjoy mountain biking, but I'm not very good. In fact, I'm not very good at any of the above, but
you enjoy it is the main thing. I don't think anybody can be good at skydiving. I guess you can. Probably takes a lot, but yeah, it's a lot of falling, right?
Yes, it's a lot of falling. Luckily, I'm good enough, right? Because I'm here.
That's right. I appreciate the overview. It gives me kind of an idea of who I'm talking to. Let's dive into the meat of it then. My first question is around obviously digging right into identity orchestration. And I'd like to break that down for the audience a bit. Can you explain what it is and walk us through maybe a real customer scenario where it made a huge difference?
I like to think about identity orchestration like being a universal translator at, say, the United Nations, but for identity systems. Imagine that every application speaks a different language. Some only understand SAML 2.0 from 2005. Others want modern OAuth or OIDC, and legacy apps might only recognize headers from the Stone Age of computing. Let me give you a real example. So we have a major enterprise that has hundreds of applications, everything from point of sale systems to supply chain management. They wanted to move from an on-prem identity system to the cloud, but they were quoted from their internal team millions of dollars and many years to rewrite their apps. That's a long time. And so with identity orchestration, we essentially created like an identity Babelfish. Have you ever seen Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or read it?
I know pieces of it. I haven't seen it officially. I need to read the book first, but I'm aware of what the story.
All right. So the Babelfish is like this fish that you put in your ear, and it essentially translates languages real time, right? And we essentially created the Babelfish for identity that sits between apps and the identity provider. So the apps continue to speak their old language, but we translate everything in real time.
Super cool. So if we're taking the Babelfish example, it's like a translation layer in between, I guess, between the agent and then whatever is calling the agent.
Yeah, that's exactly it. One of the other interesting things here is in the identity ecosystem, sometimes you have very simple login flows, right? Like you might put in your email, your password, and then oftentimes you'll have MFA. And for some more complex or very sensitive systems and different types of environments, not only do you have MFA, maybe you need to have a liveness check, right? Verify that you are human and you are who you say you are, in addition to the MFA. And if you imagine having hundreds or thousands of applications like most of our customers do, imagine having to rewrite those flows for each one of those applications. It's a large pain. So we're able to sit in between, do that identity translation so the app's code doesn't have to change. And then we can also bring in all of those unique personalized flows anywhere you need them.
So this makes total sense to me. And obviously a big problem that you're solving there. And it leads into my next question with enterprises and their technical debt, specifically around identity, right? They've accumulated a lot and enterprises have no shortage of technical debt, period, for the most part. But around identity in particular, what are the main problems that identity orchestration solves for these companies trying to modernize? And I think I could probably, as an engineer, could extract from how you describe the universal translator from the prior question, but I'm curious about specifically the problems that it's solving.
Just like how there's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, I like to think that there's the 3 horsemen of identity tech debt. You have vendor lock-in, you have what we call the rewrite trap, and identity spaghetti. So for vendor lock-in, imagine you picked a vendor in 2010 and you have 500 applications at your organization that are hard-coded to work with them. Now, vendor A triples their prices or they get breached. You're now stuck, right? And so with identity orchestration, what we can do is we can make all of your apps vendor agnostic. So it allows you to be able to move those applications selectively or all at once to a different identity provider of your choice. And then second, you have the rewrite trap. Companies have applications where, say, the last developer who understood the code may have retired in 2015. Now, imagine an organization that has a critical trading app where touching the authentication code could cost millions of dollars in downtime. What we can do is we're able to wrap that application and wrap that identity layer and be able to switch it over without downtime. And then on like identity spaghetti, this is a real big pain point is organizations have a lot of apps, right? Some have thousands of applications and they may have been developed by different teams and they might all have their own way of doing authentication. Oftentimes you have applications that are like spun up quickly where say people store the credentials in a database. Other ones might have people's credentials live in say Active Directory. And in other cases, you might have some ones that are a little bit more modern and using a cloud IDP like Okta or Auth0. And what's interesting here is that in all of those cases, like the flows are radically different, right? You have some that have email and password, others that require PIN, and you might even have some archaic things from 1999 that ask like weird security questions, right? And with identity orchestration, you can standardize all of those with SSO and be able to build out all of those more complex identity flows to achieve certain types of compliance. Again, without changing any of those apps.
That makes total sense. And it's a huge pain relief there. As you're even describing those three horsemen there with vendor lock-in, rewrite trap, and identity spaghetti, like I can start sweating thinking about all three of those things as a CTO myself. But being able to deploy a platform that eases all three of those with identity orchestration, it prevents a lot of pain there or removes a lot of pain. As we were emailing back and forth before, you mentioned working with customers around DDIL environments, disconnected, disrupted, intermittent, and limited bandwidth scenarios. And I also noticed that was really smart to call that DDIL or DDIL because that's a mouthful. So can you help us understand, help me and the audience understand what these environments look like in practice and why identity becomes such a critical challenge specifically in these? And again, like the prior questions, I think I could cherry pick, but I'm really interested to hear where this term came from and what these environments look like.
So DDIL sounds super technical, but imagine trying to keep a grocery store's, say, payment systems and registers running during a hurricane when the power grid is failing and internet connectivity is spotty at best. So imagine that a lot of these retail stores, they might be classified in a way that they need to stay open or they need to try to stay open so that residents can get critical supplies like water, food, medicine, batteries. But a lot of these stores may rely on cloud-based authentication and authorization. So what happens when the internet goes down and people need to desperately get supplies, right? So you have your employees that need to be able to log into the registers, or you have these other systems that need to be able to authenticate certain types of requests. And we architected a platform that allows those systems to operate in fully disconnected mode from the authentication and authorization perspective. So when, say, a Category 5 hurricane hits, a retail chain can keep those stores operational and still allowing those cashiers to log in, process transactions, and most importantly, serve their community when it really matters the most. And another really interesting part about this, I can't really go too far into details, but you can imagine that the same capability is super critical for the defense industry, right? Where networks might get compromised or intentionally isolated. But yeah, so you can see there's a lot of interesting use cases for this, like ships leaving the harbor, but still need to be able to access certain systems and still be able to have the right traceability and auditability of those transactions. And so it's a really interesting opportunity where identity orchestration is uniquely positioned to solve those problems.
That's really interesting. And I'm picturing when you talk about defense and you talk about disconnected systems and picturing more of a kind of an embedded type of identity orchestration or some sort of way to do that there. And I imagine that that's a complex problem to have to tackle. It sounds like you guys are tackling it well. Does this apply to, say, like maybe a manufacturing plant that's maybe in a more rural area with bad signal, or I don't know, maybe an offline type of plant? Does it apply to those types of business scenarios as well?
Absolutely. Imagine that you have maybe there's a manufacturing process that manufactures like very critical or sensitive materials, maybe for healthcare, where you have to have the correct audit trail from the initial part of manufacturing all the way to when it's finally delivered to the healthcare system. all of those machines have to go through like very rigorous like internal reviews, and they also all need to have their own identity, right? So these systems you have to have a trail that says, hey, system A worked on this part. We know that it worked on this part from point A to point B, and then it's handed off to this other system. And so in those cases, if the internet goes down, those production lines also go down, and that can be costing some manufacturers millions of dollars per hour.
No doubt. Absolutely critical to have those communications still functioning. I imagine there's a lot of, and you tell me, I guess, is there a lot of applicability to the same sort of arena there? We talk about identity orchestration, but maybe even in the IoT or the industrial technology, the machines, things like that. I guess it would apply to that too. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. They have their own unique nuances there. At the end of the day, you have processes that need identities. You have humans that need identities. And as of late, you have AI agents that need identities.
Perfect segue into my next question. So you got identity orchestration, right? And I understand the translation layer and how you're fighting the horsemen of the identity apocalypse there. You've also pioneered identity orchestration for AI agents, as you just mentioned. What was the moment you realized that AI agents needed a fundamentally different approach to identity management? When I think about identity orchestration, it seems like they could slot in as a user or something like that, or representative as a user in a similar way. But it sounds like you have a different approach there. What was the moment, and what is the different approach?
The light bulb moment really happened like several months ago for the co-founder and CEO of our company, Eric Olden. And he tells the story so much better than I can tell it, but I'm going to give it a stab. There was a Fortune 500 executive that said something that stopped our entire team, right? They're like, hey, we're about to deploy thousands of AI agents that will start making more decisions in an hour than the entire workforce typically makes in a month. How do we even govern something that moves faster than we can even monitor? And when you start thinking about that, that's interesting. It's an interesting problem. Right? Because when you go to an organization, typically you're going in for a given role. I'm an engineer, so I know typically it means I'm going in as some sort of developer, right? And when I go in as a developer, typically I need access to A, B, and C applications. I'm going to need access to GitHub. I'm going to need access to the CI/CD tools, for instance. And these agents, they can have a predefined role. Right? You could have an agent that serves as a developer, could have an agent that serves as a release manager. But these agents also have agency, right? Where they could change their roles at a moment's notice to better serve the business. And another example could be that imagine that there's a system that just spins up more agents after it finds a given problem. Right. So you have a system like, hey, we found a bug in production. I need to spin up a agent that can review the logs, an agent that's able to work on the fix, an agent that is able to verify the fix. And these are like very ephemeral agents that come and go at a moment's notice, right? Their role was determined at that moment. So the typical like identity systems are meant for like these static roles for humans, right? Like where we come in and we're like, you're an engineer, you get access to A, B, and C systems. At no point in time does the organization think like Granville's going to become a salesman and need access to Salesforce or HubSpot. And so it's really like imagine giving AI agents diplomatic passports, right? They need papers to show who authorized them and what they're allowed to do and a clear chain of custody. Every action needs to trace back to a human decision, but without requiring humans to approve every step. It's really like, how do we orchestrate trust at machine speed? And I think this like diplomatic passport metaphor really captures it, because agents need to prove their credentials. They need to show their authorization and have their activities tracked across every system they touch. And today, with the current tooling out there, it's not so straightforward on how to accomplish that.
Oh, sure. I imagine it's not. And it really rings true what you said. These identity systems are made for they're architected for more humans, or moving at the speed of humans. But when we're moving at the speed of an agent, or the speed of a computer, or a server, or any machine, it's a different problem. It is an interesting problem, very interesting problem from an engineering perspective to be able to solve then. Okay, so then let's go to more of a real world scenario based on what you just said. We've got a company with 1,000 employees, but 50,000 agents, right? Basically what you're just talking about. We've got 50,000 agents that have spun up autonomously. They're doing different things. How does your platform handle identity for all these agents differently than these traditional systems?
One of the first things that comes through like an engineer's mind is, oh, there's a bunch of load here. So maybe the problem's about load. As we just discussed, the problem really isn't about load can be solved for. It's really about governing those ephemeral entities that can constantly change their roles and their permissions. And the traditional identity systems assume stable, long-lived accounts. AI agents, they're more like mayflies with security clearances, right? For example. So really where our platform sits in is that we treat this like air traffic control. Every agent gets a flight plan, their permissions, and their constraints. We're able to track their entire life cycle even after they're gone. So for sensitive operations, we can enforce human-in-the-loop controls where an agent can prepare everything, but needs human approval to execute. So let me take a step back. And let's give it a concrete example. So imagine that we have some sort of infrastructure somewhere today, right? Let's imagine that we have some clusters let's just say we have some clusters that are being spun up. And typically from an infrastructure perspective, you have what's known as these non-human identities, right? You're able to say, hey, this particular workload gets this particular set of roles. Right? Maybe they're able to call these cloud APIs. They're able to spin certain things up. They're able to spin down, but those are pre-prescribed. But now imagine that this system is in charge of managing production traffic. And imagine it's doing some sort of A/B test. But instead of this A/B test being set up by a user, right? Like instead of it being set up by a product team that says, hey, we have feature A and we have feature B, and now we want to see which one does better for our customers. Imagine that you have an agent there that is deciding, hey, I see these two features being worked on. What if I start getting feedback now? And so imagine like this can be a very costly decision to be made. Not all features are ready for prime time, as we all know. And this seems like a silly example, but you could have systems that also might need to transfer money, and you give agents this autonomy to transfer money. So what's super interesting here is if you think about current identity systems, it's about giving an identity with certain roles and permissions, if you will. But what happens if one of the tasks that it decides to do, doing that A/B test, could cost a lot of money? So you might, instead of saying, hey, here's a static set of roles and permissions, I may need to be able to say, hey, Noah, agent over here is trying to do this. Do you approve of this? And so we call this human in the loop. And this happens out of band, right? So we're able to provide these out of band enforcement points that can be part of your fine-grained policy. So instead of just being stuck with just basic things like, oh, this is its role, these are its attributes, make a decision, we're now able to do conditional things like, you know what, based on the policy, this is approved, but we still need Noah's approval to do this. And one of the other challenges is around like delegation, right? So imagine like today, you and I, maybe we're on Claude or ChatGPT or another chat agent that we use, and we ask it to go do something, right? Let's go imagine a case where we're like, hey, let's go buy tickets for this concert this weekend. You know, in typical systems, if you try to give that process or that agent its own permission, hey, you can go buy these tickets. That's great. But what happens if that system then makes its way over to a fictional company called Ticketmaster, right? Or Ticketmeister. Ticketmeister has its own identity system, right? And you may have your credit card on file for, say, American Express, right? This non-human identity isn't going to make its way all the way through Ticketmeister or to even American Express for you to allow that charge to happen. In this new world, you have what's known as delegation change, where you, Noah, have asked this other entity to go do this thing on your behalf. And now we have to be able to track this from the start to the finish and also be able to get the right types of like tokens for authentication and authorization to happen at all the points along the way. And if you can imagine, there's a bunch of standards being put together now, even existing standards that are being reused to try to solve this. But all of the agents and all of these downstream systems in your organization, they're going to need to be updated to support this. And that's a lot of work, right? And, what happens when these protocols change? You have to change it all again. And so our platform is able to sit in and not only do those fine-grained authorization decisions, do those delegated authorization chains, and also do the human in the loop, but we're able to do that and keep up with all of the changes that are happening every week in this space. And so your organization can just focus on what it does best and bring value to your customers by focusing on your own business logic.
Oh, that is so complex as you're describing it. All of these things that are going on essentially behind the hood in your identity orchestration, you're solving a really hard problem for folks. And again, and you said it at the very end, so they can essentially focus on their core competency and not have to think about, identity orchestration, authorization, authentication, permissions, those types of things and how they're tracked all downstream. It makes sense. And it's interesting, you mentioned the delegation chains. When you were talking about the human in the loop, I was about to ask, okay, how do you put a agent in the loop? And it sounds like the delegation chains would accomplish that. Am I understanding that correct?
That's exactly it.
Well, thank you for being on the show today. This is really interesting stuff. Obviously, you're a well-accomplished individual and you've built this really great platform at Strata with identity orchestration. You're solving a big-time problem here with universal translation layer, handling all the many different formats and protocols around authentication and authorization. And now, not just for individuals, for agents and for the quote unquote, I don't want to overload the word, but load or the massive amount of authentication authorization checks for agents when they're running and being spun up autonomously. So a very complex problem you're going out to solve, but obviously a massive win for the industry, being able to focus on core competency of building products and not just around identity. So appreciate you walking me through that. I feel like I've learned a ton. Where can people go to learn more about Strata, obviously, but also around the identity orchestration piece of Strata?
Just head over to our website, strata.io. We also have some really awesome YouTube series called the Identity Heroes podcast, where we bring in some exceptional people in the IAM space, and they recount all of their just crazy stories from their careers. And I don't know, I think it's a really fascinating way to learn about the problems that exist in the space and the problems that Strata solves for.
Super cool. I will link those in the show notes and check out the Identity Heroes podcast. That sounds really interesting. Granville, thank you again for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Noah. Really appreciate it.
This was a fascinating topic to dig into with Granville. Strata is clearly solving a massive pain point for businesses with not only multiple authentication and authorization mediums, but those expanding into agent deployment and the orchestration of their authentication. If you'd like to learn more about Strata, go to strata.io. Again, that's strata.io. And thanks again for listening.